This week's episode is with Beynon, CEO of Mindbloom, one of the most innovative companies in the world today who do telemedicine with delivery ketamine. Tune in to learn more about Mindbloom and how you can take advantage of a special offer that we'll announce towards the end. Welcome to the Third Wave Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Austin, here to bring you cutting-edge interviews with leading scientists, entrepreneurs, and medical professionals who are exploring how we can integrate psychedelics in an intentional and responsible way for both healing and transformation. It is my honor and privilege to bring you these episodes as you get deeper and deeper into why these medicines are so critical to the future of humanity. So let's go and let's see what we can explore and learn together in this incredibly important time. The Third Wave Podcast is brought to you by Magic Mind. Do you want more creativity, flow, and energy in your day-to-day routine? Then go to magicmind.co and get the 2-ounce shot that contains 12 magical ingredients scientifically designed to improve your productivity. I've been using Magic Mind over the last couple months. It has replaced my morning coffee. It has matcha, lion's mane, and a number of other nootropics, and I can't say enough about it. It is so useful. So if you're interested in Magic Mind, go to magicmind.co and enter promo code THIRDWAVE to get 10% off and try it for yourself. As longtime listeners know, yoga and meditation have played a huge role as complementary practices to my own responsible psychedelic use. And that's why we're excited to be working with Half Moon Yoga as a partner for the podcast. They carry everything from basic yoga supplies to more advanced things like bolsters and sandbags to meditation cushions that are super comfy to sit on. And right now they're offering a 15% discount to Third Wave listeners with the promo code THIRDWAVE. I'd encourage you to check them out at shophalfmoon.ca if you're looking for tools to support your yoga or meditation practice. Hey listeners, welcome back. I'm your host, Paul Austin, here to bring you another episode, this one with Beynon, CEO of Mindbloom. Frankly, one of the most innovative companies in the world today, especially in the post-COVID era. Dylan has set up a fascinating system where now in 8 different states, New York, New Jersey, Florida, California, there are a handful of others as well. You can get ketamine delivered at home to you in lozenge form and then use Mindbloom's telemedicine platform to have guidance through your journey and experience. So we talk about that in the podcast today. We talk about Dylan's personal journey with psychedelic medicine, a few of his favorite books. Dylan, in many ways, is like I would say a soul brother to me. We come from similar backgrounds. We have very similar interests. He's a much better operator than I could ever be. And what he's building with Mindbloom is phenomenal. So, if you're interested in getting Mindbloom, so going through that experience, getting more details, go to mindbloom.co and enter Third Wave as a promo code, and that'll get you a discount on Mindbloom's incredible telemedicine service. So if you have anxiety, depression, anything like that, and you qualify based on Mindbloom's criteria, go to mindbloom.co, put in Third Wave as the promo code, and you'll get a discount on that healing process with Mindbloom. Okay, without any further ado, I bring you Beynon, CEO of Mindbloom. So you're in New York. How's that going?
Yes, I'm holding down the fort. It's actually going pretty well. I'm on a meditation cushion on my balcony. It is a beautiful spring day, which is a big deal out here. The sun is shining. As you noted earlier, cars are honking, which is a good sign.
Yeah.
We didn't have cars honking for a good 6 weeks, which is a little surreal. So it'll be interesting to see when the city comes back to life. What the short and long term cultural healthcare implications of COVID are. This will definitely be an interesting place to observe them.
Are you planning to get out of New York? Or are you just going to stick it out and be like, fuck it, I'm a New Yorker. I'm hanging out here for the future?
It's a good question. I think it depends on what the long-term implications of coronavirus are. It's certainly, if we're not able to implement infrastructure that allows us to test, find a vaccine, widespread serological testing, then city life is going to become a little drab. And I imagine there's going to be a mass exodus. Have you ever read The Sovereign Individual?
I think so. Or I've seen something about the book. I used to follow Simon Black's stuff, Sovereign Man, which I think may have been influenced by that book. Remind me what the book is about. I think that would be a good launching off point.
Yeah, The Sovereign Individual is like very much has been the zeitgeist, maybe like the Silicon Valley crowd. It was a prognostication book written in, I think, like 1990 that was painting the future of, there's this new thing called the internet on the horizon. We think it's going to be pretty big. And as we enter the information age, the hypothesis was that the returns to violence are going to plummet. So whereas like over time, the returns to taking other people's stuff increased, which is why we saw like agricultural societies, feudal societies, industrial societies, and then massive nation states we have today. Well, once everyone has their stuff online and works online, well, then you can't take it from them. And so what's so stupendous about this book is it got like everything right. The one thing that it doesn't get right is it predicts a mass exodus out of urban centers, because if you can work from anywhere in the world, why would you live here in New York City in a tiny box where you're paying a ton of money, paying a lot of state and city taxes when you can go live on a farm? What's really interesting.
And you're saying they didn't get that part right. Not yet, at least.
Not yet. And so what's interesting about coronavirus is potentially the unexpected, one of the many second-order consequences will be an exodus from cities and urban centers. People will be afraid. The benefits of really close propinquity and networking amongst people are going to decrease. And we might see that this be the catalyst that drives people out of urban centers. So I'm holding strong, but if I'm locked in my apartment for a month or two at a time for my and other safety, every 6 months, well, I think we'd probably get out of here.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up, Dylan. At this point, we've had 2 long conversations, right? That have been, just to get to know you. And then we had a really long conversation. I've always loved the dynamic between us, because you bring up something where I'm like, that's fascinating. Then I can come back with something. Then you come back with something. And, what's coming up for me right now with you talking about the sovereign individual is there's a guy named Alvin Toffler, who was a futurist. Mm-hmm. He used to be the editor-in-chief of Fortune, I believe. And he wrote three books. He wrote a book in 1970, a book in 1980, and a book in 1990. And these 3 books sort of laid out the future in a post-industrial society. And the second book that he wrote was coincidentally entitled The Third Wave. And I didn't find out about this until like a year and a half after I started The Third Wave.
Impossible to have an idea, right?
Right. And one of our subscribers reached out to me and was like, hey, Paul, have you seen this book, The Third Wave by Alvin Toffler? And I was like, holy shit, no, but I'm going to go check it out. And in that book, he describes exactly what you're saying. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if The Sovereign Individual was influenced by Alvin Toffler's work, because it was written in 1980. And what he talks about is the first wave was agricultural, the second wave was industrial, and the third wave was the information age. And, I think this actually dovetails really nicely with our conversation, because in many ways, psychedelics kicked off the information age. And the integration of psychedelics in the 50s and 60s, which led to the computer revolution, many people would say, and the semiconductor and all that. Steve Jobs saying that LSD was one of the most influential things that he's ever done.
Yeah, top 3.
Buckminster Fuller as well. And so now with this information age, we've sort of been in this state of decadence of industrial society for the last 60 years, really ever since World War II. And we're now sort of finally going through those final breaches. And I think with the COVID, the opportunity is to fully introduce this information age. Mm-hmm. And so my first sort of big question for you is, you're the CEO and founder of Mindbloom, which is one of the most innovative companies that I'm aware of. What you've done in response to the COVID epidemic, I think, embodies these concepts of anti-fragility that will be so important for businesses going forward. And I'm wondering, based on your pretty clear understanding of historical trends and where we see ourselves going, kind of just so we start with a small bite of the sandwich, what is Mindbloom currently doing to adapt to this new sort of world that we're living in COVID?
One, thank you for the introduction. We're really proud of what we're doing, and it's an insane honor and privilege to get to work with and support these like trailblazing clinicians that I, from afar was just rooting for, for the last decade of my therapeutic psychedelic use. I think you're speaking too highly of me. One, I think that the way the technology in general is going to be really fascinating to watch. The information age looks like it's going to go one of like maybe two directions, centralized or decentralized. Right. So like, is it centralized artificial intelligence or is it like decentralized blockchain technology? Is it centralized China or decentralized, America and democracy? Is it centralized communism or socialism, or is it, decentralized capitalism or some sort of, post-capitalist society? In terms of, and that's just something I'm thinking about a lot, and I think it's going to be fascinating to watch.
To hop in there, Dylan, quick before you go into the Mindbloom, like this is what we're seeing even in the COVID era with all these conspiracy theorists, right? If you look at like David Icke, for example, a lot of people are scared of this sort of one government, global technocratic society that runs on AIs and just as, humans exist as a way to get energy, extracted from us.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that's like the very dark, apocalyptic sort of perspective. Whereas my perspective, and I'm assuming it's a perspective that you share as well, is optimism and healing and sort of these decentralized nodes with what I'm calling neo tribes that are in some ways like Burning Man. And that we see, as we were talking about earlier, like people moving out of cities and moving into like intentional communities that are resilient, that are adaptable, that grow their own food, that have their own culture, that, maybe run a business within it, some of these sorts of things. So that's my hope.
I think that's right. I don't think centralization can work. I mean, it sounds like you read Nassim Nicholas Taleb as well, right? And his views on local and centralized. I think there's like some great idealism around like, what if we could centralize everything and make decisions that are in the best interests of everybody? But in practice, that is very challenging. There's obviously a lot of incredible like thought exercise, like the trolley problem, right? Like, how do you program an Uber that is, backed by AI when it has a decision to like, kill the driver or swerve and like kill three people but protect the driver? Like, who makes that decision? My favorite piece of art on this, there's an anime called Psychopass. Takes place in the distant future where there is a societal AI where everybody has, a score and they're all surveilled at all times. And, they're like police, similar like Minority Report, who, will get criminals before they commit anything. And society is working really well, ostensibly, but there's a lot of angst. And ultimately, that's ruined it. But you come to find out that there is no like AI. There's just like an oligarchy of like 200 people who are like keeping themselves immortal or their brains immortal. Yeah, I think that decentralization and a focus on, like you're saying, like local and sustainable isn't just maybe like I don't want to say moral imperative, but I just think in practice is something that actually can work and harkens a lot more to our like ancestral roots, which if I had like one prevailing philosophy, it's that a lot of the issues that we're facing, especially in like mental health care and sort of just a lack of meaning and purpose that seems to be pretty prevalent, is a result of us just being so distant from where our brains and bodies are evolved to be in. We really haven't evolved in the last 100, 200,000 years, and the modern world we're just ill-equipped to deal with it. There's certainly no way back, only through. So like, what do we create that is, modern, but is aligned with maybe, what we're really from, or what we're, evolved or adjusted to how we are to be, or the environment that we need to be in, the sort of like connections we need to have. That's something that I'm also really excited about.
So, let's go back to that balance versus centralization versus decentralization, right? And I think the parallel that I'll draw is in the psychedelic space, right? On the one hand, the centralization approach is the medical model. You go through the FDA, right? It's the industrial model. You go through the FDA, you get these medicines approved. They'll be available to treat depression, addiction, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. The decentralized model is the decriminalization model. There doesn't need to be any significant regulations. No one can actually charge for the substance itself. You can only charge for the time, the energy, the effort. So when it specifically comes to psychedelics, how do you think about that relationship between the centralization and the decentralization?
Interesting. Let me ask you this before we get into that.
Sure.
So decriminalization, my understanding is that when something is decriminalized, I'm from Southern California, where even before marijuana was decriminalized, it felt pretty decriminalized. But not the case out here in New York, for instance, right? So when something's decriminalized, it still cannot be, I don't want to say even commercialized, but like distributed, right? It still is illegal. It's just not, it's legal to sell, it's legal to cultivate depending on what the statutes are, but it is not a criminal offense to possess a certain amount. Do I have that right?
You're correct in that. And I think let's go beyond that a little bit, and I'll clarify one of my assumptions within that question.
Yeah.
I think my main assumption is we will see, especially with microdoses of psilocybin mushrooms, a similar trajectory of growth as we saw with CBD and cannabis, where even though CBD was technically illegal, it was still sold widely because it was perceived as being fairly harmless. And so although the laws didn't reflect actual human behavior.
Yeah, this is the Uber and Airbnb argument, right? Like Uber and Airbnb,
correct,
illegal, probably still illegal, but create so much consumer surplus that we say, hey, laws can't keep up. And so, as maybe entrepreneurs or even as a society, we're okay pushing some of these things. It's a little tougher with Schedule 1 drugs, though.
Well, cannabis is Schedule 1.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
I know.
So cannabis is Schedule 1. And I hear you, it's different with psychedelics because psychedelics are not cannabis necessarily. They're much more intense. So maybe the better question is, how do you perceive the centralization versus decentralization tension in the psychedelic space?
I guess I'm surprised there is any tension. And that's been one of the things, I think that there's been a lot of things that have surprised me, going from a psychedelic enthusiast for the last 10 years to now somebody working in psychedelic medicine and mental health care the last 2 years, is that people are really fired up about their approach. I am fired up about our approach because it's the best way for me to bring my skills and resources and experience to try to make the change that I want to see in the world most happen, which is to help transform lives today so that we can hopefully transform the world tomorrow, lest humanity runs into a brick wall going 1,000 miles an hour, which might be the path we're headed on. But I'm agnostic to other approaches. And I hope that people try a lot of approaches, right? That's how we are going to find the one that works best, within the confines of what's obviously safe for people, the law, and being thoughtful about, what could potentially maybe slow things down for everybody. And that's something we're really thoughtful about, in Mindbloom and our approach. In terms of
what is,
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, yeah, in terms of legalization versus centralization, I was on the phone recently with an exec at one of the other very large psychedelic medicine companies, very well funded, and they were talking to me about why they think that regulation is so important. I think I surprised them. I was like, I'm if I had my druthers, if I had a magic wand to wave, I would push legalization. I think the evidence is pretty clear coming out of Portugal. I think that the war on drugs has been a massive failure. And I grew up with a family member who had my mother who had severe mental illness and was an addict. And it's not like drugs being illegal stops people from accessing them. Education and not putting people in prison, but rehabilitation, I think is pretty proven is the direction to go. The reason that we're taking what you might call a centralized approach, or maybe we don't think about it so much that way, at Mindbloom is I just think that's the way that it's going to head. That's going to be the medicalization and FDA approval of these medicines, and at least for a while, if not, at least for a while, are going to be overseen by clinicians and doctors, until maybe there's a point in time which there's so much data around how safe it is and how successful it is and how few adverse events there are that we can go from making it, medical. So for medical indications, like a Mindbloom, it's depression and anxiety right now. There are other indications like PTSD and OCD and addiction that some of these medicines can be used for, to one day elective, and then maybe one day ubiquitous without the need of trained medical professionals. I just don't foresee that happening in the next several years. But I'm rooting for all approaches because these medicines are powerful and profound, and they've been huge for me and huge for so many people I know. And the more approaches that are thoughtful, I think the better.
Right, because that level of complexity creates an anti-fragile system, right? So that way it becomes easy to adapt. It becomes easy to grow, because I think as we're experiencing with COVID, right? COVID is just the next sort of disruption, but chances are we'll need, we'll have another greater disruption after that, and a greater disruption after that, because of climate change and these other things. So it's critical that we have multiple approaches and multiple lanes, so to say.
Yeah, it's just more bets. Like if you're if there's a breakthrough technology, you want to figure out what's the application of this technology that helps the most amount of people. And there might be, for different people or different use cases, the same application of this technology. And there are a lot of different considerations bringing something to market. Sometimes it's like regulatory considerations as well. So I just think we have these breakthrough technologies, whether it's ketamine therapy, which is what Mindbloom is doing currently, because it's the only prescribable medicine in the U.S., or MDMA or psilocybin or LSD or DMT and ayahuasca or ibogaine. And the more approaches for how do we help people get the most out of these medicines, and how do we increase access to these and where people can actually get them and use them, I think it's great. I'm continually surprised at how fired up people are about whatever their approach is. As long as people are approaching it thoughtfully, with good intentions, intelligence, and wisdom, and compassion, and like a real focus on safety and a real focus on viability, I think anyone focusing on this space is doing great work. And like Buddhism, I'm not Buddhist, but I study a lot of Buddhism and a big fan. Might call it rightful or skillful livelihood.
Let's get into the brass tacks a little bit. What is Mindbloom doing? How are you helping people with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy?
Our goal is to really build a next generation mental health and well-being platform. We're starting with ketamine therapy because we think it's the most effective, science-backed medicine available today that is drastically inaccessible and underutilized. In terms of our approach with ketamine therapy specifically, from day one, we thought, okay, I guess I'll give you the story. About 2 years ago now, I was working with my personalized medicine physician, a friend of mine who does like the biohacking thing with me. So he really helps me like try to optimize everything like top to bottom. It's like a nerdy hobby of mine.
Me too.
Yeah, me same. And I had founded 2 companies before Mindbloom, and was leaving to start something, and I really want to do something in mental health care. Like I said, I have a family member who was mentally ill. Well, actually, several family members who have pretty severe psychiatric illness, and just really felt like we're still in like the second inning of mental health, which now I think we're in the first inning now that I've been in it for 2 years. I didn't realize how bad it was yet. And I kept coming back to psychedelics being the thing that was most impactful for me in my growth and development. And the thing that I just thought, like, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. I know a lot of people are getting incredible results from it. I'm following the research, but it's still so early, and there's so much work to be done to really bring this to more people. And he blew my mind when he was like, "Oh yeah, I know that there are a lot of people prescribing ketamine like legally right now for mood disorders, and that's like a psychedelic medicine." And so I became a ketamine therapy patient myself. I found that it was just as profound as a lot of the experience I've had with a lot of other medicines, but super expensive, very clinical, the way it's practiced in most centers or clinics, and really hard to access. Just really not everywhere for people. And even for somebody who might be getting like 6 infusions at a local urban center, they have to drive like 45 minutes both ways. You have to bring someone with them because they're going to be impaired, and it just becomes really challenging. And so I had a couple friends of mine who had founded other consumer healthcare companies and were really using telemedicine to increase access in their verticals. I think one of the things, even as an internet entrepreneur, I continue to just get kind of like kicked in the teeth on is seeing something and thinking, nah, that can't go online. One of my really close friends is the founder of Candid. They're a big direct-to-consumer Invisalign company. And I remember when they started building Candid, I thought, you can't do Invisalign online. That's insane. That's bonkers, bananas. Totally wrong. On a long enough time scale, everything's going to go online up until when some or all humans will plug their brains into a computer, right? We'll be like floating in a little black box around space.
Like augmented reality. essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's just like virtual reality, right? Augmented reality
Virtual
would
reality.
be layering a digital world on top of the existing world. But when we can live in a virtual reality that is indistinguishable from reality, right? Or even better than reality.
Like Ready Player One. Have you seen Ready Player One?
I have. I've also read Ready Player One. If you've seen it, the movie is okay. The book is incredible, though. Really fun. A light read, but a real delightful romp.
So Mindbloom, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy,
Yeah.
ketamine. Let's go a little bit deeper into then, because of COVID, how has your business model shifted and adapted, and why do you think it was so essential to adapt it the way that you did?
That's exactly right. So from day one, we wanted to make ketamine therapy more accessible. We thought there were like sort of 3 A's there: more affordable, more approachable, and more available. While also like increasing, the quality of the experience and really demonstrating like clinical outcomes for people. That people are getting, symptom relief from depression and anxiety, and it's lasting for enduring for them. We thought to make it more affordable, as well as to like make it more approachable and easy to use and improve the experience, we're going to need to leverage technology to do it. At the beginning, the way that our model worked was we launched a center here in New York. It's really nice. It's like a pilot center where clients would come in for their first at least couple sessions. They meet with a clinician after they've already done like an online workup and consult. They would do preparation work with the psychiatric clinician, and all our clinicians are really passionate about psychedelic medicine, trained in harm reduction. Our lead psychiatric clinician has been volunteering at Zendo Project for a long time, and our medical director is principal investigator at MAPS, Dr. Casey Palios. So everything is already grounded and backed in like best practices of psychedelic medicine from clinicians and psychiatrists who live this. And so then clients would do an hour treatment, usually starting sublingually, also options for intramuscular injection. Then moves like an integration room for journaling and an integration session with the clinician. For people who are a medical fit, they would have the ability to then, at the clinician's discretion, continue treatment remotely. And throughout the whole process, we have like the application that helps people get content on preparation, setting intentions, sort of like a virtual guiding video series with our medical director, Dr. Casey Palios. We're building additional programs sort of geared towards different areas of depression and anxiety to help people get through it. When the coronavirus epidemic occurred, we as an essential medicine had the opportunity to keep the space open. But for the safety of our clinicians, for the safety of our clients, thought that there was a better way to continue to drive towards our goal to increase access to these medicines, not just by making them more approachable and affordable, but by making them also more available to people outside of even New York City. So when the pandemic happened, the both federal and state governments have brought down a whole host of both short and what looks like will be long-term changes to the medical regulatory landscape. One of the ones that was most important for Mindbloom was a suspension of what's called the Ryan-Haight Act, 2009. The Ryan-Haight Act was enacted in 2009 and essentially says that all controlled substances, and there are a lot of them, need to be prescribed from an in-person visit. And the reason we passed the Ryan-Haight Act was because in 2009, some unsavory characters started selling pain pills on the internet. And of course, we're like, okay, we shouldn't allow people to sell pain pills on the internet. That's dangerous. And then in typical government bureaucratic fashion, just had like sweeping regulations said, in that case, let's make all controlled substances require an in-person visit, not able to prescribe online. A lot's changed with telemedicine and medicine, over the past 12 or 11 years now. And so in 2018, Trump signed legislation asking the DEA to promulgate like new special registrations around the Ryan-Haight Act, especially focused on mental health care and psychiatric medicine and addiction medicine. It's actually really bonkers. Psychiatry and mental health care and behavioral health are, without a doubt, some of like the most broken areas of healthcare today. There is a massive shortage of psychiatrists and therapists to treat people and prescribe medicines. And they are also the least insured specialty. So whereas most specialties, like 80 to 90% will be insured, in psychiatry, less than like 60% are able to like accept insurance. It's a really tough situation where we have this mental health epidemic, and we can talk more about it, but after coronavirus, there's going to be a massive mental health care epidemic. There's like data backing it based on what happened with, the much smaller like SARS epidemics. And yeah, people just can't get these treatments, and they're not covered by insurance. They're expensive. They're stigmatized. So fortunately, one upshot of coronavirus is the government did move very swiftly to help increase access to healthcare, and has at least temporarily dropped the requirements around the Riot and Hate Act, which is allowing Mindbloom and a lot of other companies and just individual psychiatrists and individual doctors, physicians to prescribe controlled substances through telemedicine, which has thusly enabled us to completely move to a remote model, at least temporarily.
And to me, going back to our decentralized versus centralized conversation, that feels like a very decentralized, way of being.
Yeah, I mean, Mindbloom is interesting in that regard. We are a platform in a way that is providing services to affiliated clinicians and partners. So, Mindbloom doesn't provide medical services. Mindbloom supports the trailblazing clinicians and psychiatrists and therapists, coaches that provide their services. So, in a way, there's like centralized protocols that people are asked to follow to make sure that the quality of care is really high. But all of the clinicians and therapists that are partnering with Mindbloom to provide that care, are still providing it with like their individual medical judgment. But yeah, I mean, our goal is to help bring down the cost, make this more approachable to people. I don't know if have you ever heard the curse of knowledge, cognitive bias?
No, tell me about it.
Yes, the curse of knowledge says that once you know something, it is near impossible to remember what it was like before you knew that thing. An example is, this is probably an example that maybe a lot of people today don't really recall. But like giving someone directions, right? You're like, oh yeah, how do you get there? You take a left here, right there, left there, right there. You got that? Like, no, like you just forgot what it was like not to know this thing. Well, right. I think people like you and me who are experienced with psychedelic medicine probably forget how terrifying psychedelics are before you experience them. And I think one challenge to making psychedelic medicine more accessible to people is just making it more approachable to people. That's not like cheapening it, or that's not telling people that like, don't worry, this ain't no thing. But it is making it a little more friendly and less sterile, simpler, less complex and convoluted. And even one of the things that we've learned is psychedelic therapy is not the same as therapy. There's a lot that goes into it. There's setting intentions. There's how you take the medicine. There's even how you navigate the experience. A lot of people don't know, what do I do when I take the medicine? Do I meditate? Do I think about stuff? What do I do? There's journaling. There's actually probably the most critical part of the actual integration process to make these changes, because the medicine is really just a catalyst for change. That's putting you in a neuroplastic state, giving you the insights, and then have something to work with. So just simplifying that for people and teaching them how to do it effectively so they're not overwhelmed and scared the whole time, is making it more accessible.
And I think this is fundamentally this is basic behavioral psychology. I think there was a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini, which I'm assuming you know of or have read.
Of course.
And he talks about that process of if you get a person to take the initial step one, so to say, then yeah, exactly. So it's interesting our approaches, because our approaches are very parallel. You've chosen ketamine lozenges, I've chosen microdosing, but the sort of fundamental truth behind them is the same. How do we simplify this and make this easy for people to start to work with these somewhat mysterious medicines, so that they realize the healing potential in the medicine themselves, yes, but I think more importantly, it's really the healing potential that's within ourself, and I think that's where what Mindbloom is doing is so interesting. And a lot of psychedelic companies, the wedge that they will create in sort of the medical approach will be, right now we put a lot of our faith and trust and I would say power in the hands of doctors. And unfortunately, that power, especially over the last 40 years, has not been used so well, with pharmaceutical medications and the overprescription of pharmaceutical medications, in particular in the United States. And to me, the opportunity with psychedelic medicine is like giving people their power back, giving people their agency back, giving people, helping people realize that they have a choice to be healthier because, of those elements of neuroplasticity, like you mentioned in ketamine. So it's an exciting time to be, at the forefront of this. And I'm curious to dive deeper into that. What sort of burdens have you felt? What sort of, difficulties have there been along this process? For me, it seems like a lot of rainbows and butterflies, and it's fun and it's exciting and it's sexy to be doing this work. And, there's a tremendous shadow side to it as well. So I'd be curious to hear like, what hasn't gone so well? Where have those burdens been? What sucks sometimes with what's going on?
Yeah. So let's definitely dive into that. But before we do, I think we should talk a little bit about what you just brought up around people taking control of their own health. I was actually surprised to learn, especially from our head of clinical operations, who has like a really impressive healthcare background, that this is already like a huge movement in medicine over the past several years. It's like this idea of patient-centered versus doctor-centered care. There's like old medicine, right, which is like reactive, like let's treat the symptoms. And it's that you have this parochial, doctor, authority figure who tells you what you should do for you. And the new approach, new medicine, is more proactive. We talked a little bit about biohacking. It's about as proactive as it gets, probably unsafe. Proactive, less about treating disease and more about living a healthy, fulfilled, vital life, and one in which the patient is the one who owns their own care. And it's been a transition that's been, I think, happening pretty quickly, but still challenging. Maybe it started from like a lot of doctors, having clients come in or patients come in who have like done their research on WebMD, and that's like frustrating to them. To now we're seeing patients who are like well educated, thoughtful, and are really taking a stake in like their own health, which is going to become increasingly important.
And this just speaks again to the information age, because all the information is now there. Right. It's not held by some sort of authority figure, but it's literally like you go on fucking Wikipedia or you search on Google and you can find shit, all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating too, right? Like on the one hand, I think independent thinking has got to be one of the most important critical values, at least I hold. And I think, others. And so on the one hand, independent thinking is great. But like, what do you do when you have a search engine that is just an engine for confirmation bias, where whatever you search, you can find? You can literally take any two conditions, any medicine and any side effect almost, put in a search engine, something will come up. Like likely a really solid looking study that's inconclusive will come up and verify that confirmation bias. And 20% of Americans are clinical hypochondriacs. Right, clinical hypochondriacs, and right now, I mean, you probably who knows, probably 80%, right? Like, I'll be fascinated to see how much that number shifts because of this pandemic.
What I'm hearing is objectivity is also important. So yes, everyone can find information, but we've also seen the dark side of that, which is, everyone, now half the people in the world, it seems like think that lizards are taking over the world. So
I mean, it's like that.
It's the downside.
Yeah, I mean that. Maybe that's why like the most important thing is like teaching people how to think. Right, teaching people like what our cognitive biases are would be like one of the best inputs. And I think that's a big part of what psychedelics does. Right, it shakes the snow globe, or gives people perspective, and maybe raises them to look at things from a different perspective or even like different level. And ultimately, if you're changing how people think and how they make decisions and how they filter the world, that is like a lead domino to everything that they're going to do, their relationships with others, and like what they're going to create in the world.
Sussing out the signal from the noise. I think that's super critical for all of this. So let's get into that question that I asked before then. What burdens do you feel? What challenges do you find yourselves facing? What are the frustrations with the work that you're currently doing?
It's pretty high pressure. This is my third company. My first was a consumer platform for politics and elections, really looking to help engage voters, connect with local politicians. My last company was in a combination of like legal, fintech, data. It still exists. Really trying to help people get a better deal from the justice system. We dealt with a lot of financial regulations, a lot of people who were meeting like on the worst day of their lives, who've been like really injured, down and out, and we're really getting taken advantage of. We're trying to help. But when you're dealing with like healthcare, mental healthcare with medicines these powerful, it's a huge burden. I don't want to say it's a burden. It's a privilege and an opportunity and a blessing. I'm grateful every day to get to work on something like this. It's like a combination of art, commerce, science, and contribution. It's really exciting. But the stakes are high. We have a lot of visibility on us, not just from the healthcare field, but also from people in the psychedelic community. There's a lot of scrutiny on what we're doing and how we're approaching it, and we feel the full weight of that responsibility to be really thoughtful and to 100% prioritize patient safety, our clinicians, and like the greater cause. In terms of maybe like the medicine itself, it's early. We have been treating, our partner clinicians been treating clients since October. They've booked probably nearing like 1,000 sessions at this point. Nobody's had an adverse outcome. And I think even our clinicians and even our medical director, Casey, who's been doing this for 10 years across MDMA, the MDMA trials, phase 3 and phase 2, some of the early psilocybin for cancer anxiety study, early ketamine for depression studies. Even he's been stunned at like the results that people have been having. Without a doubt, there'll be a day where there's a problem and a patient has an adverse outcome, or maybe has a breakdown that maybe it's because of the medicine, maybe they were going to have it anyways. But we were involved, in our clinicians have like a Hippocratic oath and duty to help these patients. We don't take it lightly.
You can't take it lightly because there is a gravity to it. There is an element of, back to the sort of cliche saying, with great power comes great responsibility. And these medicines are quite powerful, even in just ketamine lozenge form, which frankly are, I've done a ketamine lozenge. It's fairly subtle. You're not getting totally blasted off into hyperspace like you might with an IV.
Maybe for you. So I have a high tolerance.
Tell me more.
I have a high tolerance to ketamine lozenges as well. So as a ketamine patient myself, I find that I need an intramuscular injection dose in order to get to like a therapeutic level that's helpful for me. There are like a fair amount of clients who come in who on very light doses of ketamine lozenges have very, very strong experiences. And the clinicians start people at like a low dose and titrate them up over multiple sessions, to get them to the therapeutic dose. They're really careful about that. Some people can really get there. And it's fascinating. It's been challenging to predict. And, we're collecting a lot of data on this that hopefully we're excited to publish at some point. There are like, 6'2", 240 pound, very experienced with, psychoactive substances men who come in who have very much like lightweights, like they'll have a very strong experience on a small dose. We'll have like, small, like 90-pound woman who has no experience with psychedelic medicines or psychoactive medicines and is like an absolute tank, and maybe requires like a much higher dose to get there. It's pretty variable. And we're trying to figure that out.
I think one resource to dig deeper into is Stan Groff wrote about this in his book Doorway to the Numinous. That he wrote in, I believe, the 70s or 80s about the thousands of experiments that he did with LSD. And what he noticed is the biggest indicator was not necessarily the physical body, although I think that is one of the leading indicators, but the biggest indicator was the level of neuroticism. And those who were more neurotic needed much higher doses. In fact, in that book, he wrote about how, there would be some people where he would give fucking like 1,000 micrograms of LSD to, and they'd just be tapping their foot like, this ain't nothing but a thing, because they were so neurotic, it couldn't break through their sort of ego structure. And so when I was hosting retreats for synthesis, and when I've done my own medicine work with friends, even my own perspective, like when I'm doing medicine myself, I always notice that when I am in a more neurotic state, or when I have friends who are very neurotic, they often need a lot more medicine. whereas those who have maybe a low level of neuroticism don't need as much. And of course, neuroticism is one of those big 5 personality traits.
That is,
so I feel like that would be a pretty easy assessment.
Yeah, that's wild that you say that. So one, the treatment philosophy we have is all based on Stan Grof's work. That's our medical director, Casey's hero. We literally start the program by talking about the inner healing. He talks about it in both to clients and through our video series, the inner healing intelligence, which is Stan Grof's concept. And that's like the treatment philosophy that everything's grounded in. But two is I need to talk to the clinicians because I think they've been talking about this, but didn't know that there was already research behind this. And their hypothesis is that when people come in and they're really anxious, is the word they've been using, have high anxiety, and they treat people with anxiety and depression, they have difficulty getting into the experience. And when people maybe have a mindfulness practice already and some mindfulness a skill set around mindfulness, or able to like relax into it, that is people who are able to like get deeper into it. One of even the biggest indicators or maybe like biggest dimensions or environmental conditions that we've seen affect anybody's individual dose. I mean, this isn't surprising. It's the setting, but it surprised us how like critical the setting is. Like if somebody has a pet, when they're doing like a remote session, it can like destroy the entire session. And if somebody has their phone on that's beeping, it can destroy the entire session. I think it might be a little, I want to say unique, but a little unique to ketamine, where it seems to be a medicine you can like really sink deep into, and then just kind of like be out of it. Maybe a little bit more manageable versus something like a strong dose of psilocybin or LSD, where you're probably along for the ride no matter what. But that's really interesting you say that, Paul. I'm gonna go back and talk to the team about that.
And this is where even a practice like breath work is so useful in terms of grounding, for those levels of neuroticism. And I think we got to wrap up the conversation here pretty soon, so we can't go much further. But I think that would be, a good bookmark for next time is, when you're looking at healing with ketamine lozenges or psychedelic medicine, what supporting modalities are also useful in that process. Dylan, it's been an honor. It's always a pleasure, but this time it's been an honor because this is in public. So I just appreciate, you taking the time out of your day to sit down and chat about Mindbloom and what you all are up to. Really appreciate the work that you're doing. Totally understand the burden and sort of the stress and the complexity and, and also the privilege that we have to do this work. It is a work of extremes, which is, I think, why it's so exciting. So thanks for coming on the podcast. And just before we end today, if you could just let our listeners know where they can find out more information about Mindbloom, and that way they can go check it out after they're done listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Paul. Huge fan of what you're doing to educate people. The longer I work in the space, I see how important educating people really is, especially right now when it's so early. People have a lot of questions, and they're important questions. You can find us in Mindbloom at mindbloom.co. And even if you're not interested in ketamine therapy, we also have some resources to learn more about psychedelic therapy or just ketamine as a medicine itself.
Great. Well, again, Dylan, thanks so much. And, I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
You too, Paul. Great chatting.